It's a late afternoon in St. Paul recording studios for AP Art History, and we are doing the second part of female artists. This one's going to be early 20th century to the present, hopefully. And what we're first looking at, it's not a very good image, but the first two people we're going to talk about actually are probably remain the two most famous female artists of the 20th century. We're going to first start with Frida Kahlo. And some of you might not know that on her father's side, I think that's right, yeah, she is German. And on her mother's side, she is Mexican. And it's little Frida in her garden of the Blue House. I think you could still go to Mexico City and see the Blue House. I'm sure it's a tourist big attraction. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting to get into her family tree. And then this is a self-portrait dedicated to Trotsky. And some of you may well know that Trotsky fled Russia. He was on the wrong side of the revolution, so to speak, and ended up in Mexico City and had an affair with Frida. And then he was assassinated by Russian agents. If you've ever seen the movie that came out in the early aughts, Jeffrey Rush plays Trotsky. I think it's something like that. And one of the things, of course, that you're probably familiar with is the fact that Frida always, or for most of her life at least, dressed in a sort of indigenous dress and look. And it was kind of, I don't know if it's performance art, but it kind of was in a way. Yeah, so there you have that one. And then this one we've already talked about because it's part of the 250, I believe, which is talking about her pain, her physical pain and her emotional pain, married to the jerk Diego Rivera. All right, now let's move to Georgia O'Keeffe. And it seems as though you can't, I think I probably said this before, you could go a year and always have some sort of Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition in the United States. She's a big draw. And this is some of her early work, which I actually kind of appreciate. Before she sent her works to Stieglitz, and later on, of course, becomes this huge sort of cult personality. But this was her early work, and I think at this point she was still a art teacher in the South. And then this is, I'm kind of proud of myself of these two slides. So on the left is a cityscape, and we talked about the fact that she did a number of cityscapes after Stieglitz said a woman could never truly paint the New York skyline. And this one on the left is dear to me because it's from the Sheldon Memorial Art Gallery on the campus of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I went to school. And then on the right side is, of course, something from her time in New Mexico. We tend to equate New Mexico to Georgia O'Keeffe. And remember, she felt as though she had found her home finally after being born in Wisconsin, high school years in Virginia, and then a time as a teacher in the South, a stint at the Chicago Art Institute, and then she finally found home. And then we talked about this one. This doesn't seem all that radical for our time period in 2020, but for the time, it was a very unusual type of self-portrait, a very unusual type of still life. And we also talked about the fact that perhaps it's showing the U.S.'s efforts to do away with Native Americans because they killed a lot of wild cattle in order to force Native Americans onto the reservations. So, in some ways, the reasons why Georgia O'Keeffe's Ghost Ranch had so many skulls like this was because of that effort of removal. Okay, so we're done with that. We're done with Georgia O'Keeffe. Let's move to Dorothea Lange. She's also going to be on another almost final lecture on photography. But I've always found it interesting to look at another one of the four photographs of the migrant mother that's on the right. And then you can get into a whole big discussion as to whether or not, why necessarily the one on the right isn't as famous as the one on the left. Was it posed? Did Lange ask the children to look away from the camera? A lot of good stuff in there to talk about. And then this is a work by Imogen Cunningham, who I think there's kind of been a resurgence in interest in her as of late. She is the older woman on the right, and this is not a photograph by her, obviously, because she has her camera around her neck. But instead, this is a very famous photograph by Judy Dater of Imogen and Twinka, who was a famous model back in the 70s at Yosemite. But I thought it was kind of an interesting little contrast between the two on the right. And then one of the things that she's known for are these very, very close-up photographs of the interior flowers, which, of course, is something that Georgia O'Keeffe explored as well. And then here is Margaret Burke White atop the Chrysler Building. And she is one of my very, very favorites as well. I have a lot of favorites. But Margaret Burke White is famous for having the first image, on the left for Life magazine, which you guys probably don't know about these days, but Life magazine was a big deal. Even I think in my childhood in the 70s, I don't think my parents had a subscription, but Life magazine was very, very popular, no longer exists. And then she also was, I believe, the first female aerial photographer in World War II. And then she did some very famous photographs while at the Chrysler Building, and then also did some other works. She had a long career, a very interesting career. And then here's Bernice Abbott on the left. You guys will see her in a EMAC soon. And then on the right, what she's mostly famous for are her photographic cityscapes. There's a brand new biography out on her. It came out a couple years ago. She's really an interesting person. She spent a lot of times in France, and later on went to promote some French photographers that people weren't very familiar with. But yeah, she's somebody you might want to look more thoroughly into. Now we're going to move to people that we are familiar with because everybody was in class when we talked about the female abstract expressionist, I don't know if we were in class. Was I actually doing, I think I was doing recorded lectures at that point. So anyways, this is Joan Mitchell. And this diptych is at the Walker. And she tends to have a little bit of a intense brushstroke, for sure. And she's kind of easy to identify, actually, out of all the female abstract expressionists. That's just my humble opinion. And then Lee Krasner's self-portrait on the left that I don't think we've seen in class before. And then one of her paintings on the right. And of course, she has moved out from underneath the shadow of her husband, Jackson Pollock. And a lot of people are giving her another look. And then somebody that we've talked about maybe even more than the others is Helen Frankenthaler and her deep saturation of paint into the canvas. And then Alma Thomas, who's on the left, we've also looked at her works. They almost look like they're cut out pieces of paper, but they're actually little color, um, I guess they're kind of brushstrokes. They look like little pills almost. She is also somebody, there's just a huge show about her, I think last year or 2 or 3 years ago. And so people are becoming much more aware of her as well. Okay, now let's go to sculpture, which is something we don't probably emphasize enough in class. Don't tell Kate that. On the left is Louise Nevelson's Sky Cathedral. And what she's known for are she takes boxes and such from common culture. I don't know if she's necessarily a dumpster diver artist, but and then puts them all together and usually paints them with black or white, but her preferred color is black. And then on the right, I've just always been so intrigued by Leigh Bonteque. Leigh Bonteque, so she makes her sculptures out of wire, canvas, sometimes horsehair, and she's got an interesting story. She, in the 1960s, everybody was just crazy about her. And then she went off the radar for decades. She was teaching, she was making art. And then about 10 years ago, a curator from the Hammer, and I can't remember the other museum, went to see her. And she had just been through a major illness, and was much more open to showing her work on a bigger scale. And she had a show that went all over the United States. I wish it would have come to the Walker. But anyways, so now she's the darling of the art world again. And very, very interesting forms with her sculptures. And then this is Louise Bourgeois. And what she's known for are her sculptures of spiders. And if you're an aficionado of sculpture, particularly female sculpture, a lot of people are very enamored with her, to say the least. Yeah. All right, now let's go to pop art, and hopefully the first name that comes to your mind without looking at the slide list is Meursault. And on the left is something that we looked at in class. And then on the right is either the exact one that used to be at MIA or something similar to it at least. It's a cocktail party. And remember that Meursault primarily sculpts in wood, but then adds things, obviously, as you can see on the right, including her own picture a couple of times there in the middle. She was Latinx and just died a few years ago. And then some more not so famous pop artists who are female. One would be Evelyn Excel's Ice Cream. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this band called Lucius. They had this actual work on the left on the front cover of their first album. And then they were at Rock the Garden. The only time I've ever gone, Avery went with me, and they were at Rock the Garden, and they went inside the Walker where there was an exhibition, and this particular work was was shown. So that was kind of fun. And then on the right is Martha Rosler's Cleaning the Drapes. What she tends to do is kind of juxtapose these domestic 1950s, 60s scenes with photographs from the Vietnam War. But she's done other things as well. I mean, she's really branched out. She is experiencing a sort of a resurgence in interest in her. And then remember we talked about how good old Klaus Oldenburg really didn't give credit to his first wife, who sewed the soft burger and other soft sculptures by Klaus Oldenburg. Later, his second wife, he did give her credit for various things, including the Spoon Bridge and Cherry. And then a lot of you, and you're not alone, it seems like almost every AP Art History class really falls in love with Eva Hesse, the main minimalist sculptor of note, females minimalist sculptor of note. And remember, she was working with carcinogenic materials, as I think you can kind of see on the right at least, and died of a brain tumor, probably as a result of what she was working with. So once again, guys, put on the suit, put on the gas mask when you're supposed to. A lot of interest in her. About 5 years ago, it seemed like every museum was having an Eva Hesse show, including one focusing in on her drawings. Okay, and then Agnes Martin would be another minimalist. I guess you would call her a minimalist painter. Probably, that's the best way to describe her. Okay, now where are we going? All right, because it's part of the 250, I don't think we need to talk much about this. This is Maya Lin's Vietnam War sculpture, but it's kind of fun. In the upper left-hand corner is the design she did she looks so young, while she was in graduate school at Yale. And so you can see what the original actual design looked like in the upper left. And then Kusama, why not? Let's have our friend Kusama come back into our lives for a couple of seconds. And of course, we watched the documentary and some of her phallic stuff in the bottom right. And we love you. We love you, Kusama. All right, and then here is, I wonder if this, I'm not traveling obviously this summer and fall, but I would be totally up for going to one of her Mirrored Room shows. I mean, they're all over the United States, it seems like, so maybe I'll get to one. If you do, send me a postcard, okay? All right, now we're going to talk about some conceptual works. So, that have a lot of text, and the first one, of course, that comes to mind probably is Jenny Holzer, and this is one of her signs in Times Square, I think. Abuse of power comes as no surprise. Wow, that's, geez, since 2016, maybe that should be our motto. And she continues to do some interesting stuff. I've talked about her before in class, or not maybe in class, but in recordings. She's not making her own text anymore, which I find interesting. And then here's this thing, I was talking to you guys about this when we went through artists of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. This is her show at the Armory in New York City, and you would get on these swings, and as you were swinging, these white fabrics would go up and down. I actually think it would be a lot of fun. Oh, sorry, this is not Jenny Holzer. This is actually Ann Hamilton. And I was talking about this at some point. Ann Hamilton's work. Okay, okay, I need to, oh, no, we're okay. All right, so this is Ana Mendieta's The Tree of Life series, and then on the right is another one. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second because I got to get my other slide list up. Hold on, guys. Okay, sorry about that. I had to get at the slide list on my computer because the one I have is a little bit off. But anyways, this is Mendieta's The Tree of Life series on the left. I think I was telling you guys that I had a student who actually did this, and it was really cold outside. It was like late fall, almost into early winter. And she had a bathing suit on, and then I think, like maybe one of the lakes, she dove in and put mud all over herself next to a tree. It was a pretty awesome work. And then another one of her works on the right. Yeah, so there's always great interest in this artist. Oops, here we go. Sorry. Whoops. I can't go forward. Hold on. There we go. All right, now, this is Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party. And this is another one I think we've talked about. And this is a collaborative work. Each of the dinner set placings um, is made for a particular woman artist or a woman in history. And then there's a goblet and the plate, um, and this was a very controversial work. It's more reflecting you know the the fact that people were prudes back in the 70s and 80s. People were upset with the plates, that they too much looked like vaginas, and it was just the whole thing was ridiculous. It was in storage for, I believe, 3 decades. And then there's this woman who donated a ton of money to the Brooklyn Art Museum to create a center for feminist art studies. And they bought Judy Chicago's dinner party, and that's where you could see it today. And Judy Chicago, until, of course, until the circumstances that we're all living under, was going to have a huge show. I believe that was opening in San Francisco. Hopefully, it'll open this fall. All right, and then this is one of my favorites, and we've looked at her stuff before, and I actually think we've looked at this exact work. This is Barbara Kruger's Your Body is a Battleground. Obviously, very feminist ideas behind this particular work. And what she's most famous for, she appropriates black and white photographs from the 1950s, and then puts text to them. And one of my favorite places that she is a part of, well, there's two. There's a huge elevator at the newest LACMA building in LA, and then there's also in the basement of the Hirshhorn in DC. She has all of her work down below in the basement. It's like a Barbara Kruger room and elevator. It's awesome. And then here is where we at now. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get yes, Barbara Kruger. Okay, yeah, so this is Lynn Hersham Leeson. And on the left is this awesome documentary. I think we've talked about it before, that came out in 2010, and we took the whole school to see this movie at the Walker. It was great. Unfortunately, I don't think I can get it online for free, so I would have showed it to you guys if we weren't all in quarantine. And on the right is one of her works. And after the movie came out in 2010, a lot more people became interested in her actual work, not just the documentary. And now she's much better off as far as financially, because people are loving her work again. Okay, and then these are two works. This is Martha Rosler again. And let's see. So in the upper left is the semiotics of the kitchen. And she basically cuts, I think, vegetables and such, and talks, really has a really sort of feminist narrative. And then in the bottom right is a work in which it's called Vital Statistics of a Citizen. This is 77. And they scientifically and in a very dry way measure her body. Which gets into issues, of course, of objectification of women, and so she's a real pioneer in video and conceptual art, and it's very feminist. And then, we have to show it. So here it is. This is Carol Lee Schneeman's interior scroll, and so she took all of these male writers and art critics, who were very negative about her work, and put it onto a scroll and put it inside her, and then took it out of her as a performance art piece. And it's probably one of the most well-known feminist performance art piece. I think it is the most famous performance art piece ever, without a doubt. And I believe she's still alive. She's in the documentary Woman Art Revolution. And she's wearing these interesting plastic devil horns, and she talks about her work and how it was received in the public. And yeah, so can't go wrong with looking at Carolee Schneeman's work. And then I think we've already talked about Lorraine O'Grady. She dresses up as a debutante as part of a performance art piece. And she's also just, her stock has gone up a lot as of late, too. And then here's Howardina Pendell. You might remember some of her paintings, and I think we talked about this work. So she has, I believe she had on a nylon stocking over her face, and then she painted it white, and then she started to talk about African American women's being shut out from the mainstream feminist art and feminist movement, not just the feminist art movement. And she takes off basically her white skin as she's talking about that. And it's a very famous, another hugely famous piece in that time period, which was 1980. And then Adrian Piper is one of my favorites. She's real cerebral. She actually has a PhD in philosophy. And she is known for, one of her most famous things that she's known for is she went out disguised as a man with a fake mustache and sunglasses, and she is a fair-skinned African-American woman. And another thing that she's very famous for is when somebody would say a racist joke or make a racist comment, she would have these little cards in her pocket and give it to them, and it would say something to the effect of, you don't know it, but I am a woman of color, and I'm offended by what you've just said. She's been living in Germany for quite a long time. She's not happy with with America, and she had a big show starting out at MoMA maybe 1 or 2 years ago, but never made it back for the actual opening. And yeah, this is one of her pieces, again, kind of dealing with issues with regards to being a woman and being an African American woman. Check out our website; it's very interesting. And then the Guerrilla Girls. So you're probably familiar with them. Starting in the 1980s, a group of 5, I think it's just 5 starting out, fairly well-known and established female artists started to wear gorilla masks. And the thing that they're most famous, of course, for are their signs, very much putting a spotlight on the sexism of the art museums and art market, and they're still going strong. I would imagine that some of the original Guerrilla Girls are no longer doing it, and there's others that have come in. There's probably some website that reveals who they actually are, but yeah, so I have a couple of things. I have something in my room. One of the posters. I have a couple of their books. There's this thing called like the Guerrilla Girls Guide to Art History, which is really kind of fun and eye-opening. And unfortunately, they still need to do what they're doing, because we all know that the art market particularly, and art museums, are still very sexist. Okay, now let's move into some photographers. This is Graciela Iturbez. On the left is her most famous photograph, probably, with the iguanas on the woman's head. And there's currently a show focusing in on her at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the only museum in the United States just dedicated to female art. So check that out. And then on the right is her recreation. This is kind of fun. Recreation of a very famous painting by Frida Kahlo when she was actually in America, and a painting of her feet in a tub. And then this one is by, hold on a second, I gotta get this right. Yeah, Dara Burnham. She's really well shown in the Women Art Revolution documentary. And one of the things that she's famous for is she takes this video from my Wonder Woman of the 70s, the one Wonder Woman I remember, which is, of course, Lynda Carter. And if you don't know it, so back in the 70s, she would twirl around when she was just, a citizen, and she twirled and turned into Wonder Woman. And what the artist did in this very famous video piece is she kept her turning constantly, kind of like a GIF or GIF or whatever you guys call them. So it's a very famous video piece. Here's Cindy Sherman. We've already talked about her, of course. Okay, the answer today for the question embedded is that my mother's middle name is Elizabeth. That is the answer. Okay, so I love my mom and I love Cindy Sherman, so I thought put those two together. Remember, Sherman does this series called the Film Still series, which she is still today mostly known for. And this one looks like it's a recreation of a scene from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, but it is not. Let's just say that. And then you've probably come across Nan Goldin before, and we might even have looked at her from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. One of the things that she is most well known for are her photographs of disenfranchised individuals, and in this case, some drag queens. And some of it's really hard to look at. It's showing some drug use and people on the margins. This one doesn't necessarily have to be that. And then Catherine Opie is probably one of my top 5 photographers that I love. And what she became known for, which was kind of her breakout stuff, was taking photographs of transgendering individuals, and basically just the whole gamut of LGBTQ is what she became famous for. And I love her because she just does really interesting stuff. I might have mentioned before that she did a series of what was inside Elizabeth Taylor's house while Elizabeth Taylor was kind of on her deathbed, and she never met her, even though she did that series. I think I told you guys about that before, but anyways, Catherine Opie. She also did this really cool series on her child, and she did some controversial stuff as well that I'm not going to get into. Okay, and then this is somebody that we haven't talked about before. This woman is Caribbean. I'm going to even say I think she's Cuban. And this is Maria Magdalena Campos Pons. And I actually have a catalog of her work. And in this case, she's got here a 6-paneled piece, so I think it's a polyptych, and it deals with hair in Cuban Caribbean culture. Yeah, so that's her. And then we're going to somebody that I dearly love, probably besides Cindy Sherman, my favorite photographer, and that's Renique Dijkstra. And in this one, she takes a picture of a young girl who is a refugee, starting in, I want to get this right, starting in 1994. So I think it's the not Balkan, but the horrible war in the former Yugoslavia. And then you can see she takes a picture of this girl, I think every year or 2 years, up until she's a actual mother herself. Bada boom, bada bang. So go back to her as a little girl, and now she has a little girl, which is a really cool series. And then the other series that I really love is minutes after somebody has given birth, she takes a picture of women, as you can see on the left. The whole series is really fascinating. And then on the right, one of her more famous works of a young girl at the beach. So Dykstra, look her up. And then this is a work by Janine Antoni. I don't think this was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Maybe it was. So this is curious. So check this out. So the further left one is her dad dressed up as her mom and her mom dressed up as her dad. And then the middle one is her dad with her mom dressed up as her dad. And then the far right one is her mom with her dad dressed up as her mom. Woo! That's a tongue twister. And then this is a work by Paparazzi Wrist. I think we've talked about it before. It's Ever Is Overall, and the filmmaker that did the famous video for Beyonce stole this whole idea. There's a lot to be said about that. But Paparazzi Wrist is a lot of fun, and I think we've talked about her before. Okay, now let's go to the most famous Native American artist working today. And that, of course, would be Juan Quick to See Smith. Is how you pronounce it. And she typically brings in a lot of things that are the popular culture, appropriating images and ideas from Native Americans. That's one of her themes in her works. And then this is a painter, a Native American painter named Kay Walking Stick. She just had a show about 5-6 years ago that went around the United States, and she's very well known. And then this is Julie Buffalo Head. And I don't know why the coyote is holding the state of Nebraska, but I love it. I forgot that was in there. She graduated from MCAD, and I think she's still local. I think that she's in St. Paul, and she's originally from Oklahoma. And she's probably as far as, besides Wendy Red Star, probably one of the most talked about Native American contemporary artists. And did we see anything? Well, yeah, when there was the huge female Native American art show last spring/summer that I took all the students to, I think she definitely had some works in there. And then we all know Shireen Nishette. That's misspelled on the slide list. And so on the left, an earlier work, which we've talked about before, and on the right, her video work, which is also quite old. I mean, comparatively from 1999. And I am going to get her catalog. Like, I get paid on Friday, and that's my first priority. I already have one of her catalogs, but I really like her work. And we've talked about the Iranian themes, and particularly the themes of gender roles in Islam. And then this is somebody I don't think we've talked about before. She's from Pakistan, Issa Kander, and she was traditionally trained in the making of Pakistani miniature paintings. And then but what she's done with it, which is what I love, is she's really played with it. As you can see, this is not a traditional painting. And then let's see, no, I didn't have it. So I thought I had another one of hers. Now she's gone into these huge videos, which are really cool. Okay, if you've done your homework, you know Zaha Hadid, who's from Iraq but spent most of her life in England. For a long time, she was a sort of conceptual architect. Nobody was building her buildings, but now that is not true. And this is the Antwerp Port House from 2016. She just recently sadly died, maybe 3-4 years ago. And oh no, this is the Port House. I don't know what this one is. Was this one on the? Oh, it's the Performing Arts Center in Abu Dhabi. And then this is actually the port. Isn't this cool? I love this piece. I love this structure. The Antwerp Port House above the old one. There you go. And then I think we've talked about Cal Fay before. One of the things that she's well known for would be her avatar, China Tracy, that we see on the right. And she made work inside Second Life, which I've always appreciated, even though I'm not into video games at all. And then this is kind of fun. So BMW commissions a contemporary artist, I think every year, at least every couple years, to basically color, I guess, or paint one of their cars. And what Cal Fay did was when you put a screen, some sort of screen or up to this car, then the wild, colorful ribbon thing shows up. So in other words, she doesn't have the actual painting on the car itself, but it is, I guess, what would you call that? VR, I guess, virtual reality. It would be interesting to know if you were driving along a highway and I don't know, you had your camera out. Hopefully, you're not driving with your camera, but you're sitting in the passenger seat and you took a picture of this thing on the road, and then you would see the design up top, I guess. I don't know. It would be interesting to know how it all works. And then somebody from South Korea. Here we have Kim Soo-ja, and this is her famous video series called Needle Woman, in which she goes to various different capitals in the world and places herself with her back to the camera, and then people weave in and out of her. And so, in other words, she's kind of a needle woman. There you go. Kim Soo-ja, wow, fantastic artist. And then this is one of her works that is based off of a tradition in Korea where people put their belongings inside these textiles, and then they make them into bundles. And I believe they're called, butare. Yeah. And this is a work by Tabemo. She's Japanese, and she does these large video installations, sometimes dealing with her personal life and just Japanese culture in general. And she's on Art21. Actually, almost everyone that I've talked about from Asian American artists are on Art21. And then I think we've talked about Mi Le's. She's Vietnamese American, and the fact that she took this photographic series of people in the South who were Vietnam War reenactors. Oh boy. And she actually participated in it. And she just got a huge article in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. And we've looked at her stuff. And then hopefully you're able to recognize Doris Salcedo if you've done your homework. This piece is a memorial to a massacre in Colombia, and each one of the chairs represents somebody that was killed. All right, we're almost done. Now we're going to look at figurative art. This is a work. These two works are both by Alice Neel. On the left, it's a famous painting of her daughter-in-law pregnant, and then on the right, a really wonderful self-portrait when she is much older. So basically, Alice Neel was a contemporary of all the female abstract expressionists that we've talked about before, like Joan Mitchell and Lee Krasner and Helen Frankenthaler, Alma Tallman. So she continues to do figurative art, and she paid dearly for it. I mean, she's one of those people that was just basically ignored until late in life, when she became this sort of grande dame and was on the Tonight Show and everything. And then you know her and I know her. I love her. Kiki Smith. That's her famous, of course. Lilith, sculpture on the left. And then I'm glad. So on the right is the Pietà with her cat. look in the Louisiana Channel, which is that very famous modern art museum in Denmark. Look for her newest, the interview of her. She's still kicking. She's still making art. And then Marlene Dumas is a white South African. And this particular work was taken from her own childhood pictures of her in elementary school. She can be controversial. I think she's kind of mellowed over the last probably 5 to 10 years. Is seen as one of the blue chip artists on the world art market for sure. I think she's made some records. And then this is, I was going to have her on the EMAC, but it just didn't work out. But this is Marilyn Minters. This is a painting, you guys. And they're based off of photographs. I want to know more about her. I've read a couple of interviews, and there's a new interview of her that's kind of fun. Maybe I'll put it on the final. But yeah, her claim to fame are women in high heels, sometimes going through mud, sometimes not. And yeah, so woo, she's a very talented artist. And then on the left is the last person we're going to look at, Dana Schutz. We've talked about her before. One of the most famous female painters working today. And on the left is kind of typical of her, just sort of a strange, eerie world. And then we talked about the fact that she got into a lot of trouble because she did a painting of a very famous photograph of a young man who was killed and tortured, and his mom wanted there to be a photograph of him, open casket, and a lot of African Americans, Emmett Till, a lot of African Americans were upset that Dana Schutz had done this painting. And she has since, in an interview in the New Yorker, said that she's never going to sell it, that she learned a lot in the process. Yeah, so it was a real big dust up in American art scene. Okay, 47 minutes. That's not bad. I think you guys can handle 47 minutes. We're done with this one. Goodbye. Okay.